Growing up, people would have said I had the kind of childhood you see in Christmas commercials. We had money. Not billionaire money, but enough that nothing important ever felt out of reach. Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac on a hill, with tall windows that caught every sunset and a backyard that rolled down into a line of maple trees. When I was little, I liked running until the grass blurred and I forgot where the fence actually was. The carpet inside was soft enough to fall asleep on. The kitchen always smelled like something warm. My father, Daniel, was a quiet man. He was the kind of Christian people in town pointed to as an example. He led prayer every morning before school and every night before bed. His voice had that steady, practiced rhythm pastors have, even when it was just the three of us at the table. When he spoke, you believed he believed. My mother, Grace, lived up to her name. She moved through rooms like she already knew how everything would play out. She read poetry in a soft voice, made food that tasted like it belonged in a magazine, and somehow always knew what I was feeling before I did. She'd rest a hand on my shoulder at exactly the moment I needed one. I loved them both without hesitation. For a long time, I thought they didn't keep secrets. That wasn't true. They never hid things from each other. They hid one thing from me. There was a man who lived with us. Lived might not be the right word. He existed around us, like mold creeping along the edges of a room. He always stayed where the light ended. I almost never saw him fully. He was a smear of motion in the corner of a mirror. A heavier shadow in the doorway that didn't move when the ceiling fan spun. The smell of smoke in a room where the oven was cold and the stove was off. He scared me in a way nothing else ever had. I remember the day I finally asked about him. My father and I were in the garage, dust hanging in the sunlight like lazy snow. We were cleaning out old boxes, pushing them around, trying to make room for another shelf my mother wanted. He worked in silence when he was thinking. That afternoon felt like nothing but silence. "Dad?" I said, after picking up the same box 3 times without moving it. He was stacking plastic bins in the corner. "Yeah, Eli? Who's the man in the house?" He stopped mid-motion. His head bent forward like the bins suddenly weighed 3 times what it had. For a second, I thought he'd pretend he didn't hear me. Then he straightened, wiped his hands on his jeans, and turned. He smiled. It was thin and too fast. "That's your uncle," he said. "He doesn't mean you any harm." As young as I was, I knew my father didn't have a brother. I'd seen both sides of the family at holidays. There were no missing uncles. That night, he sat me at the kitchen table like I'd done something wrong. No plate in front of me, no Bible open, just his hands folded on the wood, knuckles white. The overhead light hummed. Outside, bugs smacked softly against the glass. "If you ever see anything strange," he said quietly, "anything in the mirrors, the shadows, anything that doesn't sound right." He swallowed. "Ignore it." He said it the way he said house rules. As firm as brushing my teeth, as non-negotiable as not touching the stove. Don't ask questions. Don't follow. Don't talk back. If you see him, just keep walking. "Why?" I asked. His eyes flicked toward the back door, just once, like he heard something I didn't. "Because that's what we do," he said. "Do you understand me, Eli?" He looked scared. That frightened me more than the shadows. After that, I started watching him more carefully. As soon as the sun went down, my father changed. The warmth didn't vanish, but it dimmed, like someone turning a dial. He grew quieter. Rigid. He flinched at sounds that never used to bother him. Some nights he'd excuse himself after dinner and go sit in the basement, alone, for an hour or more. No TV, no music. Just the sound of the freezer kicking on and off above him. The first time I saw the man clearly, not as a trick of light or a suggestion in glass, I was 9. He was standing on our back deck. He looked like he'd stepped out of a photograph that never aged. His coat was long and dark, hanging just past his knees. His face was bare and expressionless, framed by hair that could have been any color under the sickly yellow porch light. His skin looked used. Not decaying, not bruised, just dulled and worn like old paper. Wherever he appeared, my father always got there first. If there was a knock on the back door, my father was already halfway to it before anyone else registered the sound. If the security light flashed on out back, he was on his feet before my mother could even turn her head. He would step outside, pull the door closed behind him, and let that man stand half in shadow, half in the spill of light from the kitchen. They spoke in whispers. The glass swallowed most of it. But I saw a pattern. The man, my so-called uncle, would produce a small folded slip of paper. My father would take it, tuck it quickly into his pocket, or unfold it right there. Either way, his shoulders always tightened when he read it. His jaw clenched. Then he'd move with purpose. He'd grab his keys. Leave the house without finishing his meal, without kissing my mother's cheek, without telling me when he'd be back. Sometimes he went straight for the phone in the garage, using the old landline no one else touched. I'd hear his voice in flat, tense fragments through the door. Once, he didn't come home until the sky outside my window was turning pink. The morning after that, his shirt was half untucked, and his eyes were veined red. He poured coffee with a hand that never quite stopped shaking. I tried asking again years later. I didn't even get through the first sentence. Dad, that man. Don't. His voice wasn't angry, just solid. Just don't. So I learned to be quiet. But the man kept coming. It happened 10 years ago. I remember the exact date because it was 2 days after my 8th birthday. My mother had thrown me a party in the yard. Balloons tied to the fence posts, paper plates bending under the weight of cake, the whole family pretending we were normal. The kind of memory people frame. By the time this happened, the leftover frosting had crusted on the counter, and the balloons had already begun to sag. The heat of summer had started to let go. The evenings carried a crisp edge, the air threaded with the smell of dry leaves and chimney smoke from people eager for the first fires of the season. The maple trees at the back of the yard were bleeding color along their edges. I was halfway down the stairs with a book in my hand when I saw my father standing at the back door. I heard the hinges sigh before I saw him. He pulled the door open a crack. The security light buzzed on, casting the deck in cold white. The man was there, as if he'd been waiting. He looked the same as always. Long coat, stillness that wasn't quite human, presence that made the hair on my arms lift even from halfway up the stairs. I knew the routine. I'd seen it enough times. He would hand my father a note. My father would read it, his face tightening. Then everything would shift into motion: coat, keys, phone calls, whispered apologies. I'd learned the rhythm the way you learn the sound of your own front door closing. But that wasn't what happened. The man reached out. Something small and white rested between his fingers. My father took it. He didn't pocket it. He unfolded it right there, in the doorway, the air from outside flattening the edges against his hand. His eyes moved over the words once. They moved over them again. He didn't speak. He didn't move. His hand dropped to his side, the paper still pinched between his fingers. For a moment I thought he might drop it. Or fall. I stepped down another stair, the wood cool under my bare feet. Dad? I said. He turned slowly, like someone waking from a deep sleep. His face had gone pale in a way I'd never seen, the color drained from his lips, his eyes hollow and wide. He didn't look at me at first. He stared somewhere past me, toward the hallway. Then he focused on me. My father had never looked at me like that, like I was something fragile and doomed at the same time. It wasn't anger or disappointment. It was grief, pure and sharp, pointed straight at me. His eyes filled with tears. His mouth twitched like he wanted to say something, but before he could, my mother walked in from the kitchen, dish towel still in her hands. Daniel? She asked. What is it? He turned to her like he'd been jerked on a string. He held out the paper. She took it, confusion wrinkling her forehead, and unfolded it. Her mouth opened. For a split second, no sound came out. Her shoulders caved in around her ribs. Then she dropped to her knees, the dish towel slapping the tile beside her. The sound she made wasn't fear. It wasn't even grief, not the kind you see in movies. It was helplessness given voice. A raw, strangled sound that ricocheted off the cabinets and lodged under my skin. It was a sound that said something had broken inside her that she would never, ever get back. My father's hand hovered over her shoulder. He tried to take the paper back. She jerked away. She crushed it in her fist, pressing it hard against her chest like she could force it through bone, force it into her heart, and maybe suffocate it there. That was when my father remembered me. He turned his head. His gaze landed on me like a weight. "Eli," he said softly. My name sounded wrong in his mouth. "Go to your room for a little while. Your mom and I need to talk." He said it calmly, like I'd just interrupted a conversation. Like my mother wasn't on the floor, still half sobbing into a handful of paper. I didn't argue. I walked back up the stairs on legs that didn't quite feel attached, closed my bedroom door, and sank down in front of the window. My book lay forgotten beside me. Outside, the wind pushed the trees back and forth in slow, restless motions. In my 8-year-old mind, the most logical explanation was death. Someone must have died. A relative I'd never met on my father's side, maybe. A name I'd heard once over dinner and never stored. It had to be that. It didn't explain the way my father had looked at me. At some point, I slid off the window seat and pressed my ear to the floor, hoping to catch anything from the kitchen. For a long while there was nothing, just the subtle pops of the house settling, the hum of the refrigerator. Then a sound, faint but clear. My mother crying. It was softer now, no longer a scream. Just a thin, threadbare weeping that slipped through floorboards and carpet. I couldn't make out the words, only the shape of her voice. Cracked. Worn down. Resigned. Eventually even that faded. The house settled into a heavy silence that made it hard to breathe. I must have fallen asleep like that, curled on the carpet with my ear pressed against it. When I woke, the light outside was gone. Clouds smothered what was left of the evening. The hallway beyond my door was dim, touched only by the distant glow of a lamp downstairs. I didn't remember climbing into bed, but I was under the covers. My throat was dry. I needed water. And to pee. I pushed the blanket back and walked into the hall, fingers tracing the familiar dips and bumps in the wall as I went. Just before the top of the stairs, I heard them. My parents' voices. They weren't whispering anymore. They weren't trying to be quiet at all. Their words floated up clearly through the open space of the stairwell. "How are we supposed to do this in 6 months?" my father asked. His voice was thin, stretched tight. Something clattered against the counter. A mug or a spoon. The impact made me flinch. My mother's reply came sharp and brittle. "We can't just give him up. He has never asked for something this twisted before." Her breath hitched. "How do we even do that, Daniel? How do we hand over our own?" She cut herself off. I heard her slap her palm against something. "Damn your father for this. Damn him." My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. Give who up? What did 6 months mean? Who was asking for anything? The questions piled up faster than I could process them. Underneath all of it, beneath every word they spoke, I felt something else, fear. Heavy. Consuming. I thought of the man on the deck. I thought of the paper in my mother's fist. An idea rooted itself in my chest like a splinter. I didn't understand it fully. I couldn't have. But I knew this much. Whatever was on that paper wasn't about some distant relative. It was about me. And whatever that man was, whoever he was, he had power over us. Over my family. Over my life. The days that followed were wrong. Nothing obvious at first. No slammed doors or screaming matches. My parents didn't fight openly. They moved around each other the way strangers do when they share a crowded space, careful not to touch unless they had to. They spoke, but something was missing in their voices. The warmth or the easy familiarity, I couldn't tell. Even when the sun came in through the windows, the house felt dimmer, like someone had turned the brightness down on reality. He appeared more often. I'd catch glimpses of him in places he'd never been before, at the edge of the kitchen doorway, reflected in the microwave door, a shape in the backyard that didn't belong to any tree, any shadow. At night, he started bleeding into my dreams. Sometimes it was just a feeling, like someone standing just behind me in a room I couldn't turn around in. Other nights, he was a tall outline behind the glass of my bedroom window, watching. Waiting. On the worst nights, I'd wake convinced that if I reached out, my hand would meet his coat sleeve in the dark. I wanted to tell my parents. To walk downstairs and just say it, he's not hiding anymore. But every time, the words died in my throat. I was afraid of what they'd say. I was even more afraid they'd tell me I was right. Around that time, my mother started gaining weight. She wasn't eating more. If anything, she pushed food around her plate more than she used to. But her shirts began to hang differently. Her steps grew slower. A fullness gathered around her belly that hadn't been there before. Once, I passed the bathroom and saw her in the mirror through the half-open door. She had one hand resting on her stomach, fingers spread, thumb stroking absent circles. He stood beside her. Not reflected. Not behind her. Beside her. I blinked. The next second, the space was empty. I told myself I imagined it. My father threw himself deeper into prayer. His study door was closed more often. When I dared to peek through the crack, I saw him kneeling on the worn rug, Bible open in front of him, lips moving non-stop. Sometimes his forehead nearly touched the floor. His hands shook as he flipped through pages. The words tumbled out of him in fragments, verses he'd known his whole life suddenly sounding like flares he was launching into the dark. The one time I screwed up my courage to ask, "What's happening?" I said at dinner. "What's wrong with Mom?" They shared a look I still can't fully decode. "Nothing you need to worry about," my mother said, her smile stretched too tight. "I'm just tired, honey." "We're handling it," my father added. "You just focus on school, okay?" They weren't lies. They just weren't answers. The night it all fell apart started with the wind. It came out of nowhere, dragging the air along with it. The trees lining the yard scraped their branches against the windows like fingers. The power lines groaned overhead, humming with a low, uneasy sound. Thunder rolled somewhere far away, circling without ever breaking directly overhead. The house creaked as if it were an old ship at sea. I woke up to the sound of screaming. My body reacted before my mind had time to catch up. I sat up in bed so fast my vision went white at the edges. My heart was already racing, my lungs tight like someone was squeezing them. My mother's voice tore through the house. "You know we have to give him a child tomorrow, Daniel!" she screamed. The words were jagged, torn apart by sobs. "You know what happens if we don't?" My father's reply was raw and pleading. "We'll find another way," he said. "Just wait. Grace, please. Just wait." "I'm done waiting," she shrieked. "You know what will happen if we fail him. You know." There was a crash. Something heavy hitting the floor. A door slamming, maybe? Or a body. Then one sound, a single, sharp scream from my mother, high and metallic, like something splitting open. And then nothing. I was already out of bed. I didn't remember standing up. One moment I was staring at the dark ceiling, the next my feet were pounding down the hall, my hands skimming the wall to keep from losing my balance. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, my legs were shaking so hard I had to grab the banister. The air at the bottom of the stairs smelled sour and thick, like pennies and bleach. The hallway lights downstairs were off. A glow spilled from the bathroom at the end of the hall, the door halfway open. The light pooled across the floor in a pale rectangle. I stepped into it. My mother lay on the tile beside the tub. Her body was twisted at an angle that made my stomach flip. One leg stretched out, the other bent underneath her in a way no leg should ever be. Her dress was dark with blood from the waist down, soaked so thoroughly I couldn't tell where fabric ended and skin began. Blood had collected under her shoulders and neck, sliding along the slight slope of the floor toward the drain. Her hair was stuck to her cheek. Her eyes were open, staring past me at the ceiling. Her mouth hung slightly open, frozen between words that would never come. There was a knife in her hand. My father was on his knees beside her. His shirt was stained red. His face blotched, as though he'd been slapping it with his own hands just to stay awake. His eyes were wild, unfocused. He was holding something. It was small and pink and terrible. A tangle of limbs and skin and blood, too formed to be nothing, not formed enough to be ready. He cradled it like it might cry if he wasn't careful, his arms curved protectively around it. He rocked back and forth, whispering into the raw, wet air. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I knew what a baby was supposed to look like. This wasn't that. This looked like an idea interrupted halfway through becoming real. The edges of my vision blurred. The room tilted. I wanted to scream, to ask what happened, to demand that someone explain why my mother wasn't moving and why my father was holding that. Nothing came out. My throat locked up. My legs turned to water. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run. So I did. My hand hit the door frame on the way out. I stumbled into the hall, hitting the wall hard enough to knock the air out of me. I grabbed the banister, hauled myself up the stairs, and didn't look back. I ran to my room. I closed the door. It didn't feel like enough, so I went into the closet, yanked the hanging clothes aside, and folded myself into the darkest corner I could find. My knees hit my chest. My nails dug into my calves. I stayed there until pale light started leaking through the slats of my closet door. I stayed long enough that my legs went numb and my throat hurt from holding back sound. The funeral was quiet. Not because no one came, they did. Half the church where my father used to preach filled with people who wore dark clothes and the same unsure expression. They brought casseroles and pies, nods and half-formed condolences they'd used for other tragedies that never quite fit this one. The sanctuary smelled like lilies and varnished wood. Condensation had fogged the windows from the cold outside. The heaters hummed softly beneath the pews. The casket was closed. Everyone said the same things in whispers near the coffee table. She always seemed so happy. She loved Eli so much. Such a devoted woman. So kind. I never would have expected. The coroner called it suicide. The blood loss was obvious. The prints on the knife were hers and hers alone. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that anyone else had been in the room when her veins opened. On paper, it was clean. Clinical. I didn't speak during the service. I sat in the front row and stared at the space where the casket met the carpet. My hands were folded in my lap because that's what you did in church. My eyes didn't sting. My throat didn't burn. It felt wrong to cry. It felt equally wrong not to. My father stood at the podium and delivered something like a eulogy. The words were there, about her warmth, her faith, her love for the community. But his voice sounded hollow, like someone had scooped the substance out of him and left only the shell of his preaching cadence behind. He didn't look at the casket. He didn't look at me. After the service, we drove home in silence. The trees that lined the road were stripped halfway bare by the storm. Gusts of wind threw leaves against the windshield. I watched them smear across the glass and vanish. "Dad?" I asked, when we pulled into the driveway. He left the keys in the ignition for a long time, hands still on the wheel. "Can we talk?" I said. "About what happened? About her. About everything." He blinked, as if remembering I was there. He shut the car off, opened his door, and stepped out without answering. Inside, he walked past the bathroom, paused with his hand on the knob, and then disappeared behind the door. He stayed in there for an hour. We never spoke about it. Not once. Not in passing, not on anniversaries. It became a wound sealed over with silence. My father stopped going to church. At first he just needed time. Weeks stretched into months. He stopped answering calls from other pastors and elders. The Bible disappeared from the kitchen table. The prayers before meals faded, then vanished completely. The blessing he used to murmur over me before bed dried up without a word. Something else took their place. Bottles. At first they appeared one at a time in the trash. Then the recycling bin. Eventually he started stacking the empties under the sink in paper bags until they overflowed. Brown glass clinked behind cabinet doors every time he reached for a plate. I heard him in the kitchen long after I'd gone to bed, twisting off caps, pouring generous amounts into a glass, drinking them down in long, determined swallows. Sometimes he muttered to himself between drinks. Names. Verses. Apologies. I couldn't tell. Then the muttering changed. He wasn't talking to himself. He was talking to someone. He'd stand by the back door, the same place where he used to whisper with the man, staring into the dark yard. His voice would rise and fall in one-sided conversations. Sometimes he laughed, the sound sharp and wrong. Other times he sobbed, saying he was sorry, saying he tried. Sometimes he just listened, nodding at empty air. I stopped trying to get him back. I had questions that burned holes in the inside of my skull. Questions I knew would never find answers. I had fears that grew teeth and claws in the dark, and I didn't have the courage to drag them into the light. So I went quiet too. For years after she died, I broke. I was 17. It wasn't a special day. There was no anniversary, no holiday looming. Just another late autumn evening where the wind whistled under the eaves and the house felt 3 shades colder than it should have. My father was on the back porch, slouched in the old wooden chair that creaked whenever anyone else sat in it. The porch light was off. A bottle sweated on the table beside him, half empty. He was staring out at the yard, lips moving. I recognized the cadence now, the one he used when he was talking to him. Something inside me snapped. "You killed her," I said. The words came out flat. Too calm. They surprised me as much as they seemed to surprise him. He didn't look up at first. His fingers tightened around the neck of the bottle. I stepped closer, into the halo of light spilling from the kitchen window. "You let her die because you're a coward," I said. He lifted his head slowly. His eyes were rimmed red, the whites turned a dirty yellow. His cheeks had hollowed out over the years. His shirt, once crisp and tucked, hung off him. "You never did anything," I said, my voice climbing. "You never fought for her. You never fought for me. You just did whatever he said like some servant. You let her bleed out on the floor like that was a normal thing that happens in a bathroom." He opened his mouth. No sound came out. His throat worked. Then, too fast, he pushed himself to his feet. The chair tipped backward and crashed against the wall. His eyes shone bright in the half-light, like something feral. "He wanted you," he shouted. Spit flew from his lips on the last word. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. "What?" I said. "A child of ours." His chest heaved. "That's what the notes said. A child of ours, within 6 months. That's what he asked for." My stomach dropped. He was trembling now, shoulders shaking, his hands balled into fists at his sides. "We couldn't give you," he said. His voice cracked on. You were just a boy. We thought if we gave him another one, it would be enough. That's what people do with monsters, right? They give them something else to eat." My tongue felt thick. "So you..." I tried to form the sentence and couldn't. He nodded once sharp, then shook his head, then nodded again like he didn't know which answer fit. "We tried," he said. "We tried to make another child. But we didn't have enough time. The baby..." His face contorted. He looked away toward the yard, toward the trees. "It wasn't ready. And your mother, she couldn't bear the thought of handing you over. So she..." He choked on the words. His hands went to his face. His shoulders hunched, and for a second, I thought he might fall. "She chose the only thing she thought would work," he whispered through his fingers. "I didn't stop her. Maybe I couldn't. Maybe I didn't want to see." I stared at him. All the anger I'd been cultivating for years, the late-night fantasies of screaming at him, of throwing things, of making him feel even a fraction of what I felt, collapsed in on itself. It didn't disappear. It just lost its shape. I didn't know what to feel. I didn't know if there was a word for it. After a long stretch where the only sounds were the distant hum of cars on the highway and the soft rattle of the trees, I asked the question that had waited the longest. "Where did he come from?" I said. My father lowered his hands. His eyes met mine and, for once, didn't try to look like anything but what they were, empty and terrified. "My father," he said slowly, "your grandfather, made a deal with something. I think." He sank back into the chair. The wood creaked under the sudden weight. He rubbed the heel of his hand under his nose, then stared at the lines in his palm as if he could read the rest of the story there. "I was born wrong," he said. "Crippled. Couldn't walk right, couldn't talk right. They said my lungs weren't formed properly. The doctors told my parents I'd never live a full life. That if I made it past 5, it would be a miracle. I'd never heard any of this. My grandfather had died before I was born. I'd seen photos of my father as a teenager, tall and healthy, but never younger. I don't remember it," he went on. "I was too young. But my father swore it was hopeless. And then, one morning, I just stood up." He laughed, a short, humorless sound. "Walked across the room like I'd been doing it my whole life. Talked. Breathed. Fine." He let that hang in the cold air. "That's when he came," my father said. "Same as with us. At the door. Just standing there. Your grandfather knew what he was. I don't know how. Maybe he'd been asking for a miracle in all the wrong places." He looked up, over my shoulder, towards some point on the far wall inside the house. "He let him in," he said. "He started getting notes. He did things for him. God knows what. Left at all hours. Made calls. Got into fights he didn't talk about. Turned down certain jobs and took others. And when he refused something..." He rubbed his jaw. "People went missing," he whispered. "First a cousin. Then an uncle. People in our family disappearing with no explanation. No funerals. Just gone." He swallowed. "One day, I came home from school and my father was gone. No bags packed. No note. He just never came back." He twisted the edge of his shirt in his fist. "A week later, the first note came for me." Silence swelled between us, thick and alive. "I don't know what he is," my father said finally. "I still don't. Your grandfather never explained. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe that was part of the deal, keep serving and stay ignorant." He breathed into his nose, exhaled slowly. "But he gave us things," he said. "Money showed up when we needed it. Jobs opened up that shouldn't have. Accidents swerved around us. It looked like blessing, son. It looked like good luck. He healed me, gave me a life, and all he asked for in return were little tasks." He shuddered. "Until he asked for you." He tilted his head back and stared at the porch ceiling, at the spiderwebs gathered in the corners. "I curse him every day," he said quietly. "Your grandfather. If he'd left me the way I was supposed to be, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe I'd have died young. Maybe I'd have had a short, quiet life. But it would have been real. And you..." His voice cracked. This time he didn't bother hiding the tears. "You would never have known any of this." He dragged his hands down his face, leaving his cheeks red and raw. "I used to wonder if I was ever meant to be a father," he said. "If maybe he let me live just so I could carry the burden forward. So I could pass it to you." He turned his head, looking straight at me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm so sorry, Eli. I should have ended it. I should have done something. I don't know what, but anything would have been better than this." The words landed heavy. They didn't fix anything. They didn't bring anyone back. But they cracked something open in both of us. For the first time since my mother died, either of us was pretending to be okay. He leaned back in the chair, head tipped toward the dark sky. His lips moved, but the words were too quiet to catch. Maybe they were prayers. Maybe they were curses. Maybe, finally, there was no difference. Eventually, his body sagged. The bottle slipped from his fingers and thudded onto the porch. His breathing deepened, softened. Sleep wrapped itself around him like a mercy he didn't deserve but desperately needed. I stood there for a long time, listening to the soft whistle of his snore, the whisper of wind through the trees, the steady tick of the kitchen clock inside. Then I turned and went back into the house. The hallway felt longer than it ever had, each step stretching the space like taffy. The pictures on the walls watched me go by, my parents on their wedding day, my father in graduation robes, me on my first day of school with a backpack too big for my body. I didn't know where I was going. I just walked. Halfway down the hall I felt it. A hand on my shoulder. Not a heavy grab. Just a light touch, fingers resting gently near my collarbone. Enough weight to be undeniable. Enough coolness to make every hair on my arms stand up. I froze. The air around me went strangely still, like the house was holding its breath. I turned my head. He stood behind me. Not half there. Not distorted in a reflection. Not hiding where the light couldn't quite reach. He was fully visible. Absolutely real. His coat looked the way it always had from a distance. Long, dark, the fabric worn smooth around the seams. Up close, I could see the details, fraying threads at the cuffs, a button that didn't match the others, a faint spatter on the hem that might have been mud or something else. His skin was pale, but not corpse-like. Drained, like he'd been standing indoors for years. His face was long, the lines around his mouth carved deep, his expression unreadable. I looked for his eyes. I can't remember them. I've tried. I can remember the grain of his coat, the creases near his collar, even the faint smell of smoke and something sweet rotting underneath. But his eyes slide away from me every time I try to pin them down in my mind, like they were never meant to be remembered. He lifted his hand from my shoulder and held it out in front of him. A folded note rested between his fingers. I didn't mean to reach for it. My arm moved anyway. My fingers closed around the paper. The moment it left his hand, he vanished. No puff of smoke. No flicker. 1 second he was there, the next, the space behind me was empty. I stared at the note for a long time before I unfolded it. My hands shook. My heart thudded loud enough to drown out the ticking clock. I already knew it was meant for me. There was no one else left. The paper crackled softly as I opened it. Inside were 3 words, written in neat, slanted handwriting I'd seen once before on a night that ruined my life. Your father.